Wow, this is really cool. This is great being here today, and I hope I can be the right honorable Maud and be the right politician. And thank you, Jens, for that incredible introduction. I feel like I could just stand here and have you gaze upon me now and say nothing with such a great introduction. Anyway, thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm very excited to share with you a story about what can happen when you create the space for innovation. I returned to California state government 3 years ago when Governor Brown asked me to lead the newly created Government Operations Agency. Much had changed in the 8 years since I had been away from government. I could feel that public servants were a bit defeated, a bit run down, and not feeling that their new ideas would matter much nor even be well received. I felt the most important objective I could have in my new role was to help create an energy around the value of new, practical ways of making sense of government processes so that those processes added value to the policies they were intended to implement. We needed an environment where it was okay, if not good, to step out on a limb, to take a calculated risk to make government more valuable to the end users, the people of California. Maybe that sounds simple, but in the world of government, it's difficult, really sometimes extremely hard. Government thrives on routine, on doing the same thing the same way year after year. Workers know that they can't get criticized for doing something the way it's always been done and approved. Managers are able to follow a known path carefully and steadily. Unfortunately, that environment usually doesn't leave space for new ideas, new thinking, and certainly not new processes. We needed to change that. Shortly after taking office, I talked to Jennifer Palka, Code for America. We talked about what CFA was successfully doing in communities throughout the country with apps that changed processes and enabled citizens to actually see that their potholes were being fixed and their streets were being plowed. I told her that we at GovOps wanted to find new ways of confronting old problems and explore new ideas. We needed to change the environment so we could view processes through the lens of innovation. We needed an environment that allowed risk, not forbid it. So we were not just open to new ideas, we were actively seeking them. In areas of technology and civic engagement, we wanted your innovations and your concepts. So that leads us to the story that started a year ago, right here at the summit. Will Lightburn, my dear colleague, the director of California Department of Social Services, had been introduced to the work of Code for America, and he was interested in furthering other partnerships. At about that same time, the state was going to release a request for proposal for the new child welfare system using a traditional waterfall IT procurement process. The IT system we have for child welfare is functional, just barely, and not at a level that the federal government requires. And it hasn't been since 1993. 14 years ago, California was penalized nearly $30 million and committed then to create a new system, 1993. Let me just emphasize that it is what we're talking about here. California's state-supervised, county-administered child welfare system, which provides services to abused and neglected children, children in placement and with their families. The business of child welfare is protecting the most valuable of our state's residents, who are frequently raised in poverty and have experienced tremendous trauma in their young lives. By and large, this work does not occur in an office, at a desk, but in community homes, in hospitals, in schools, in foster homes, in community centers. Child welfare service workers make life and death decisions about the safety of children on a daily basis. In fact, child welfare service workers in California investigate nearly 500,000 reports of severe maltreatment and life-threatening neglect to children a year. This system is just too important to fail. But we were failing. We failed because we weren't considering change. Our thinking was, need a new technology solution, create an RFP for a monolithic enterprise, have it built with little input from the user, and maybe eventually produce something that may be over budget, late, and doesn't necessarily meet the end user needs. Sound familiar? State government has been doing that for decades, I'm sad to say. By not creating an environment where new thinking, innovative thinking, could be embraced before being dismissed as too risky. In this case, the same path meant that the Child Welfare Services Department were about to go public with version 7 of an RFP that had been worked on for 3 years. Those familiar with it knew that at best, that RFP would produce a project that would likely be late and maybe over budget, and even well-written specs would produce something outdated by the time it was delivered, if we were lucky 5 years from now. California's Health and Human Services Agency was concerned about the path they were on. Because of his previous experience with Code for America, Will Lightbourne asked Dan Hahn from CFA to review the RFP and offer suggestions. Dan, Jennifer, Polka, and Todd Park had some serious reservations and concerns with the RFP that they immediately requested a meeting with me to discuss it. They suggested we break up the CWSNS project into multiple RFPs, turning it into an agile procurement. Here was an opportunity to increase delivery speed and to reduce the risk by breaking the project into modules. It would get a better product, a working product, into the hands of the county social workers that the social workers would help design. Novel. It would create a minimally viable product that would allow for full implementation over time. Better tools delivered more quickly to the end user means that vulnerable children would be put in the best fitting foster care placements the first time, not the second or the third time. It sounds easy, but changing long-standing processes and ideas about how things should be done are really never easy. We've got to create a space. Creating a space for innovation means that accepting a different kind of risk where the downside can be managed, making clear that the variation of yes is okay, but no is not. A lot of behavior is driven by fear of risk. Indeed, people have been rewarded in public service for avoiding risk at all costs. But often the steps taken to shield an organization fail to account for the risks of holding on to the status quo. Ironically, in a changing world, sticking with status quo can create enormous risk, but government is so adverse to change that the risk of the status quo is seen as better than taking the new ways of doing things. When projects have failed, government, whether it's the legislature or the executive branch, have added rules in place to try to stop the failure. Unfortunately, these rules often just bring more restrictions that can lead to more failure. It is not easy to say don't follow rules, but we must sometimes say it's okay to find a new way that doesn't include all those old rules. Once we do that, it creates the space for others and begins to change the environment and builds a new culture. Todd Park provided some good advice. You already have the right people. The system has taught them to say no, Todd told us. We just have to set them free and provide them with the administrative cover to say yes. By golly, it turns out he was right. The biggest challenge was not finding the right people or the right idea. It was allowing the people and the ideas to move forward. So in just a few short weeks, from a war room established in my conference room, the team, HHS, Child Welfare Services, GovOps, and Technology, were able to secure the support of the Governor's Office, the Department of Finance, the Legislature, Washington, D.C., and most importantly, the county welfare directors. There were lots of questions, but a realization by most that we needed to try something different. I called it a demonstration project for just that reason, to give those, including my own Department of Technology, who were skeptical, some assurance that we weren't going to go blindly, down a path with every project. It was clear that this was an opportunity we could not pass up. The right project, the right people were willing to take the risk because we knew that the status quo would possibly provide a costly, unsatisfactory project that failed everyone. And the stakes were just too high. Frankly, our children needed better and deserve better. I can't say it enough. If we weren't already in the mindset of wanting to do things differently, and if we hadn't already been talking to and familiar with Code for America and 18F, General Services Administration Technology Transformation Service, this project would not have happened. Early steps have been very successful. A state employee who worked on the project for almost 10 years said to me recently that we're going to have a product in hand under a year after a decade of working on it that had produced nothing. How awesome is that? We are taking the lessons learned and applying them to all of our ET projects, waterfall or agile. The goal of the project should be on time and on budget, but there's something fundamentally more than that we have not been focusing on, and that is the user satisfaction, as you've heard so much of this morning. If the product doesn't work for the end user, even if it's on time and on budget, then we failed. So as we embark on new projects every day in the state of California, including how to create a licensing and track and trace process for medical cannabis from scratch, we are working with this new principle. Users matter. We will produce a minimally viable product on time, and then we'll iterate. The journey is building a new culture, a new vocabulary, a new view of who the customer is, and making sure the system works for the customer. Both sides are signing up for the service relationship. No more one and done. Instead, the product will evolve based on user needs. We are starting to build a culture in which people realize finding a new way for an old problem may actually present less risk. So I want to thank Code for America and all my other wonderful partners in this project for their help. And to everyone in this room, if you have a good idea that government can use, bring it on, because we are ready. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.